Good morning. My name is Jeff Mount, and I'm a senior fellow at the PPIC Water Policy Center. Thank you for turning into our program today, Paying for Water System Resilience. This is the second session of our virtual conference, Seizing Drought, Water Priorities for Our Changing Climate. At the outset, I want to acknowledge that yesterday the Zoom gods were very unkind to us and wiped out our program. I want to tell you that it's available online now at our website, and those of you who registered for this will have received an email giving you a link to it. I am told the IT group has sacrificed an old Macintosh in response. Today we're bringing together an amazing group of experts over the course of 3 days, this is day 2, to discuss how to tackle climate change's highly disruptive effects on our water system. And in particular, today we're going to focus on one of the most difficult tasks, paying for all of that. This is a major challenge, as we all know. First, I'd like to thank our diverse group of sponsors for making today's event possible. These organizations are listed on your screen and on our website. Our annual sponsors represent a broad cross-section of organizations engaged in California water. This diverse coalition of funders supports activities that expand our audience, our credibility, and our influence as a trusted and objective source of information on water policy in California. Please consider joining us as a sponsor or donor so that we can continue to make programs like today's possible and ensure that they are free and open to the public. You can learn more about supporting us at ppic.org. And as a reminder, PPIC is a public charity. We do not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does PPIC support, endorse, or oppose any political party or candidate for public office. And finally, and this is important, we have some time set aside at the end of today's program for audience Q&A, which is almost always the most entertaining part of these shows. If you have a question for our speakers, please send an email to the address on the screen, which is ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We'd appreciate you including your name and your organization along with your questions. And with that, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Ellen Hanak, who is the director of the PPIC Water Policy Center, who will moderate today's panel discussion.
Thank you, Jeff. And hello, everybody. Good to imagine that I'm seeing you now. Nice to know you're able to join us live, and do hope that you'll ask us questions, because that's always the most fun part of these discussions. So I've got a great panel to moderate, and just before I bring them up, I want to give a little bit of an overview with a few numbers to give you a sense of sort of how daunting the challenge is of water system spending for resilience. So first, big picture overview, we spend about $37 billion a year on our water system. That includes supply, quality, flood management, ecosystems. And to many people's surprise, most of this, the vast majority, is funded locally. That's through local ratepayers paying their bills and paying local taxes. That's about 84% in recent years. The state comes in with an important but smaller share, about 13% in recent years. And the feds are not that important at all in the aggregate, 3% about in recent years, although those dollars definitely do matter a lot to the areas that they do fund. And a few years ago, we estimated that with all of this spending, there's about a $2 to $3 billion a year annual funding gap. And that is for what we've come to affectionately call fiscal orphans. These are areas that just don't have the capacity to raise the funding that's needed to meet the services to a reasonable level. And it's our sense now that this gap may be growing given the need to address aging infrastructure and also to make it more resilient to the changing climate, all while ensuring that water services remain affordable for low-income households and for communities. So we've got a great panel that's going to help us crack this nut and figure out how we do this. The bios are going to be, you can find them on the event page, so I'm not going to go into the details in the interest of getting right down to the meat of the conversation. So let me bring them up. Aaron Baker, who is with Valley Water in Santa Clara County. Hi, Aaron. Good morning.
Good morning.
Next, Rachel Ehlers, who is with the Legislative Analyst Office.
Morning.
Then we hello, Rachel. We've got Rosemary Menard, who is over in Santa Cruz with the City of Santa Cruz, managing their water system and currently also managing the whole city on an interim basis. Congrats with that, Rosemary. And then last but not least, Alesandra Nájera, who is a program officer with the Water Foundation, where, among other things, she works a lot with on safe drinking water issues, but she also has not that long ago was wearing a hat of being a Senate staffer. So we're going to tap her knowledge on federal issues as well. So good morning, everybody. Welcome. And let's get right down to it. I want to sort of do a first round of questions to do a status check on meeting resilience challenges. And first we'll go to look at one of the important fiscal orphans that has received a lot of energy and attention in recent years, been a big state priority. This is safe drinking water in especially in low income, small communities that have not been able to supply safe and adequate water to their residents. And these are communities that are challenged both with lack of scale economies, but also low incomes. So clear fiscal orphan, but we've been doing better, I think. So I want to hear from you both, and maybe Rachel, why don't you kick us off with telling how we're doing?
Well, thanks so much for having me, and thank you for letting me start with good news. I'm sure we'll talk about some bad news as we go over the course of the next hour, but I think this is a place where we do have some good news and some progress to highlight over the past few years. I mean, we have passed new laws that give the state additional authority to work on consolidating systems and appointing administrators to really help move the needle in some of these small communities. We've done a comprehensive needs assessment to try and get a handle on the problem, because we can't address what we don't know about. So particularly for some of the domestic wells and small systems. But then really the money is, I think, the big story. In 2019, the legislature passed Senate Bill 200, which provides $130 million annually to address this issue for 10 years. So there's a stable source of funding that we can kind of count on and plan on to try and make progress. And this funding is not bond funding, which is what we've often used. So it can be used for activities other than capital projects, things like providing technical assistance or funding administrators, or even operations and maintenance for a period of time, if that's what's needed to get some solutions in place. And then in this most recent budget passed by the legislature, there's an additional $1.3 billion in general fund, again, more flexible than bonds to address some of these issues. So there's still a lot of work to be done, particularly now that we know where the problems are and we have funding. How do we get things done more quickly and expedite the progress? But it really is, funding is not the main barrier at this point, which I think is a change and something to be optimistic about.
Great, thank you. So Alesandra, over to you. And I know you work a lot with the community-based organizations who are on the ground spending this money or trying to spend it. So tell us a little bit of a view from the field.
Absolutely. Well, the Water Foundation did support the advocacy of Community Water Center, Clean Water Fund, and Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and working for a lot of the programs that Rachel just outlined. So it is nice to take a moment to celebrate some of the progress that we've made in allocating this funding. I think the other piece that needs to be acknowledged, and just, as I'm wearing my federal hat a little bit on this conversation today, is the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure deal that was signed by President Biden yesterday. So I know we're going to dive into the meat of this in a little bit, but it's just an exciting opportunity to have this additional federal funding, primarily coming through the SRFs. And then I also wanted to acknowledge another challenge for equitable access to drinking water, which is water affordability, and paying for that as well in this conversation. So we know that the state legislature here in California allocated $985 million in federal funding to begin working on an arrearage payment program. And there's also the seeds of federal programs, one being LIWAP and another being money that could be coming through EPA and the Build Back Better deal. So I look forward to digging into all of these with all of you today.
Thank you. And just for those who are acronym challenged, LIWAP is
the low income water program that's essentially modeled on LIHEAP, which is the energy affordability program. So it's kind of our analog here in the water world that's been in response to the COVID pandemic.
Great. Okay, now let's look to our local folks to hear a little bit about some of the resilience challenges that you are facing in your water systems. And I'll say, you know, you're both in places that are, you know, relatively high income areas in California. In some ways, you know, one could think more capacity for funding perhaps than in some of the certainly in some of the smaller communities, that rural communities that we've just been talking about. But that doesn't mean that you're out of the woods, I think. So would love to hear about kind of what some of the challenges you're facing and how you're pulling together the resources to make the needed investments. And maybe Rosemary, will start with you.
Great, thanks, Ellen. No one here would probably think of Santa Cruz as a place where, you know, you have fiscal challenges, but I will tell you that for the water system, we're a surface water supplier, which is a little bit unusual on the Central Coast. And we do have a very large capital program that's designed to deal with both aging infrastructure and the climate challenges we're already experiencing. Supply variability is a really huge issue for us in light of the fact that we don't have much in the way of storage. One of the things we've been working on over the last about 5 or 6 years is a major capital improvement program. Right now, that program over the next 15 years is slated at about $650 million, and that's for a population served of about 100,000. So we're a big system, although at the small end of the big systems, and we don't really have the economies of scale that some of our larger neighbors over on the other side of the hill, the San Jose system and the San Francisco system and East Bay Mud and Contra Costa have, but we have all of the same kinds of basic challenges in terms of, you know, diverse supplies in lots of locations, pipelines and dams and reservoirs, et cetera. And I think the one other thing that we have is we do have a challenge here related to affordability that's been building over the last number of years. And in 2019, we did a study looking at affordability of water and wastewater rates for our 100,000 population served, and found that about 16% of our population on a census block group, so really kind of disaggregated, has challenges already, and we're still looking at major rate increases going forward.
Thank you, Rosemary. So now we're going to pivot over to Aaron. And Aaron, I would love it if you could talk both about the water supply piece, but also Valley Water is kind of is an interesting water supplier because you're also managing the flood side of the house too, and that has some different funding challenges maybe.
Yes, thank you, Helen. And yeah, you know, our mission is to provide Santa Clara County with affordable, clean water, flood protection, and a healthy environment. And we believe that these are basic services that everybody in the county should be afforded. And so we strive to get an integrated, socially equitable, balanced approach. And one of the things that you were talking about, Ellen, is making sure that we have not only clean water, but flood protection and a healthy environment. And so making sure that the environment is also part of what a good community is. And as water is key to a healthy environment, and you know, with a limited amount of water and the fact that fish and wildlife don't pay water rates, we're trying to find the right balance between affordable water supply and flows for the environment are some of the things that we're tackling right now to make sure that we can make all those things work. Fortunately, we have just passed in Santa Clara County, we just passed Measure S, which actually helps us ensure that we can get a healthy environment with clean water. And as Rosemary mentioned, you know, we have a large capital improvement program and other things on the books to make sure things work. The other thing is that although most people know where Santa Clara County is, we like to say we're the heart of Silicon Valley, and we serve 15 cities and almost 2 million people. But we also have agriculture. We also have disadvantaged communities, and we also want to make sure that we have a healthy environment for everybody in Santa Clara County. So a lot of times, not only is there, you think of, you know, turning on your tap for water, but also the water that feeds the environment and everything else that you have to make sure that you have a sustainable world. And with that, there are some funding sources and some other things that we like to work on. For us, you know, we're able to not only use some of the water rates, some of our imported water on the South Bay Aqueduct is through a property tax measure. We also have some other, like I mentioned, with Measure S and some of those others, we do have property taxes that we're able to move on those. And then we also have some ad valorem property taxes which have allowed us to work on certain things such as the open space credit or other things that can help us support agricultural or other communities as we move forward.
Thanks, Aaron. I think I want to get more into affordability, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about some of the new money, some of the money that's in the news. that thanks to the state budget being, in a surprisingly good place, that gave us the opportunity to have some general fund infusions that are pretty rare in water, and then, as Alesandra mentioned, also the new federal funding. So let's talk a little bit about that. Rachel, do you want to give us a kind of big picture overview of what's special about this general fund infusion that's coming our way?
Yeah, more good news. I get to do more good news now. The recent budget included $4.6 billion in investments for water and drought, almost all from the general fund. So really kind of unprecedented investments. Most of it, it's across 3 years, but most of it is in this current year, 3.3 billion of that. And it's really a wide variety of activities, both short-term, immediate drought response type activities, but also longer-term thinking about water supply, water recycling, stormwater, groundwater cleanup, implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. But because it is mostly general fund and not bond, again, it gives us flexibility about the types of activities we can fund. So there's some items in there like new research about forecasting and how we can forecast better in changing conditions, a new program that has stream flow, provides funding to purchase water rights essentially, or stream flow for the environment, a new program to pilot some land repurposing that may come out of agricultural uses, and how can we use it in a new way that it works for the landowners and as well as the environment. So some new innovative projects and activities. And I think, as you said at the outset, the state is usually a minority player in the funding for water activities. And so I think that's probably not going to change in the long term. Hopefully we'll continue to have some of these large infusions, but it's really thinking about where can state funds be the most effective? What's the most helpful way to use state funds? So things like focusing on public trust resources where there aren't ratepayers. As Aaron said, the fish aren't paying for their water. So how can we help there? How can we spur new innovative approaches, research? How can we help vulnerable communities that may not have the funding? And then how can we provide some seed money for local projects to help spur other investments? So I think this recent package by the legislature and the governor addresses some of those important state priorities. Looks like we may have another big surplus coming in the next year. So again, thinking about where can the state be most effective and targeted with its funding.
Thank you. So Alesandra, give us a little bit of a similar kind of sense of what's going on from the federal side.
Absolutely. So the bipartisan infrastructure deal that was passed yesterday is apparently one of the largest, if not the largest, investments in water that the federal government has ever made. And I think we've got some really exciting numbers coming down. Just overarching, I'll start with the big ones. So I'm gonna throw a lot of numbers at you here. We have about 55 billion for water infrastructure that's coming down through a number of different paths. That's through the Clean Water SRF, Drinking Water SRF, and I'll break those down in a moment. We also have 8.3 billion in Western water infrastructure through the Bureau of Reclamation. That'll be for things like infrastructure, storage, recycling, water smart. And then we also have funding for legacy pollutants. So that'll be cleanup for Superfund sites primarily. But since I know we're talking about fiscal orphans here, just diving into some of the drinking water funding in particular, we have nearly 11.7 billion through the drinking water SRF funding and 15 billion for the drinking water SRF for lead service line replacement, which is—
And to just tell folks what the SRF is.
Well, that's the state revolving fund. So this is kind of the primary mechanism that we've been using to provide drinking water funding through the states, but this is federal funding that'll be coming down through the state SRF programs. We also have 4 billion for emerging contaminants through that program, which will be used for PFAS contamination issues, which is, I know, an emerging contaminant challenge that maybe some of our local folks here on this call will be able to talk about as well. I think these are really important numbers. There's going to be some access challenges for disadvantaged communities who have historically had trouble accessing these pots of funding. So there is still work to be done in ensuring through the EPA and through the state that disadvantaged communities can access these dollars. I think some of the work that'll be important there will be TA work, and then also support from NGOs, CBOs, and probably a lot of folks who are listening to this call right now. But I think this is just really incredible progress.
Great, thank you. And so that's what you summarizing is sort of a national level picture for California. We probably don't know exactly what's going to come our way yet, but do you have a sense of sort of what that means relative to, will this significantly increase the federal dollars that we're getting?
Sure, it is a little bit difficult to say, but depending on the federal formulas that we have here, hopefully it will provide a significant increase for California communities. I think, I mentioned affordability earlier, and I think some of the challenges is that, some of these pots of funding end up being small once you break them down. So for example, there's an authorization in the bipartisan infrastructure deal for $225 million for affordability. And that funding will have to come through Build Back Better. But once that gets parceled out, it'll be small. But I think the policy changes that we're seeing here are really important for California too. So there's going to be decreased requirements for cost shares so that disadvantaged communities and rural communities might have a better chance of being able to access this funding without having to put up significant amounts of their own funding. And there's also, again, this TA, technical assistance for these smaller communities that'll be really helpful across the nation and in California as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now Rosemary and Aaron, I'm guessing your agencies may be among those that are going to be applying for, or maybe being able to make use of some of these funds. So I'd love to get your reactions. Sort of what are you seeing that's going to be most helpful? How can we make the best use of these funds? What else would be useful down the pike? Neither of these are permanent pots of money, right? They're 3 years, 5 years kind of thing. So Rosemary, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I think one of the most important things about funding like this is being ready. When the time comes, when it's available, if you have projects and if you have things that you've been working on that have been through the environmental reviews, being ready to apply and have all those things worked out is really important. And luckily for us, having worked on our capital program for the last really 5 years, we are ready. So we've got major projects that we're teeing up for funding, whether it's through WIFIA funding or SRF funding. WIFIA, Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. It's a federal loan program for large water projects. Also, we have already taken advantage of SRF funding for a couple of the big projects we've got underway right now in construction, of about $150 million in 1.4% SRF loans. And that's great. But again, with the financial burden that's going on from this capital spending in our community, we really need and are looking for and working hard to be prepared for grant funding where it is available, because low interest loans are great, but they still have to be paid back. Just as one example, when I started here about 7 years ago, we had about debt service on the water department at the time was about under $2 million. At the end of the 26-27 fiscal year, which is the end of our next rate period, our debt service annually will be $25 million, which was roughly the size of the water department's operating budget in 2014 when I got here.
Yaza. Aaron, how about the view from the Valley?
Yes. So again, we've our water rate affordability is really driven a lot by our capital improvement program. And of course, we have investment needs to continue to deliver this clean, safe, reliable water. But of course, we've got aging infrastructure, climate change, and increased regulations. The other thing that Rosemary also mentioned was the cost of imported water in dry years, and some of the reserves are other things that we need to keep moving. So what that really comes down to is this massive capital improvement program. And a good portion of what we're looking at is storage and recycled water. And of course, those are some of those things that we've just heard about from Alesandra. And so we're very excited about moving forward with some of these projects that we have on our books, looking forward to. But I'd like to highlight recycled water. So like right now we're in a drought emergency. One of the things that Santa Clara County has its eye on is recycled water, purified water, the use of a locally controlled drought resilient source. And so some of the things that we've seen there is, money for some larger recycled water projects. And so we're very excited to see those types of things move forward. And we're hoping to work with the partnerships, the wastewater agencies and others to help recycled water be part of a way of life. The other things that we do see on there is conservation programs. One of the things that we've kind of, as we move forward or as we look at certain supplies, we understand that conservation is actually one of the most cost-effective, I won't call it sources, but one of the cost-effective supplies we kind of have, right? I mean, if we want to keep if we want to make sure that water use and conservation there, conservation programs and funding for conservation programs is very key on for us also.
Great. Okay, before we go to our next question, I want to just remind the audience that we would love to get questions from you for our Q&A session, which is going to start in a little bit. There's still time. So here's the email to use to submit your questions, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. Please say who you are in your email so we can acknowledge you when we ask your question of the panelists. So now I want to kind of bring what you all your words of knowledge and wisdom to sort of the really hard nut to crack question about the growing affordability challenge, which you've all touched on, and we haven't uttered the words Prop 218 and Prop 26, but I think it's probably time to do that. So as I noted in the intro, most of the water system funding does come from local ratepayers and local taxes, but we do also in California have some constitutional requirements around how we raise money. And so, Rachel, maybe I'll toss to you just first to give the audience a quick nutshell on the Prop 218 and 26 and what that means for local agencies in terms of what they can and can't do. And then we'll talk a little bit about, what the solutions are.
I'll keep it very high level so we don't lose anybody. But I think in a nutshell, those initiatives really make it a pretty high burden that locals need to come over in order to get over in terms of raising taxes and fees at the local level. Pretty high vote thresholds and kind of hoops to jump through, if you will. That's how the voters passed those propositions, and that's how they want it. So that's what we're living with now. So it makes it challenging at the local level and at the state level. It's a pretty high threshold as well. So, I will leave it to my local partners here on the panel to talk about how they address that. But it does create some barriers both at the local level and at the state level for generating new revenues.
Great, thanks. And so, Rosemary, maybe go to you next in terms of you mentioned water affordability challenges, and you and I were talking about this at one point, and I said, well, would you, since as you pointed out, Santa Cruz as a whole, one thinks of as a relatively well-off community, wouldn't there be possibilities for some low-income rate assistance funded by other folks in the community? And that's not necessarily easy.
Yeah, so Santa Cruz has got a pretty solidly tourism-based economy here, which is, not surprising. If you want to come over to the beach from the Silicon Valley, we have a lot of people who do that and come over and spend money. So that is really an important element of our foundation of our economy here. But at the end of the day, in terms of the kinds of challenges that the city and the local municipality has, it's really a pretty big deal to be thinking about trying to find some other resources here locally that might be able to fund a Prop 218 compliant water rate assistance program, meaning that water rates themselves cannot be used to actually provide that funding. That's a limit on what the Prop 218 includes. That is a pretty big barrier to addressing the kinds of needs that I think our community would generally support, of raising a little bit more money from other ratepayers to support those continuing equitable access to those who can least afford to pay. So my version of what the big challenge is that Prop 218 really does have us in a set of handcuffs that makes it very difficult. And we do not have other sources of income that we can realistically tap into now or in the future, as far as I can see. And particularly in this role of interim city manager, I've gotten to understand the needs in the community in a much larger way than when I was just serving as water director. But I will say that I'm very optimistic and enthusiastic about both efforts at the state and the federal level to explore some kind of ongoing low-income water rate assistance program. That to me would be a real boon to help organizations and like mine and communities like mine find a way to do what they need to do with respect to the capital improvements and other things that are driving water costs, and still maintain affordable and equitable access to everyone for really important water resources.
Great, thank you, Rosemary. And so, Aaron, over to you now. And on this, I guess you mentioned a little bit is it Measure S? I think is the most recent one. But so Prop 218 and Prop 26, they have so somewhat different requirements on the water supply side and on the flood side. On the water supply side, it's all about having the costs and benefits very closely tied to the services that a property receives, right? But in the case of water supply, there's at least there's still representative government, I guess I will say, in the sense that the board, elected board can approve the rates, and as long as there's not a majority protest, it's something that can go through. And and arguably that's part of the reason that our water supply system, at least in the larger communities, has been more or less doing okay on the funding side. With floods, it's different. You have to go out and get a vote for any additional money that you raise. And I think one of the things that Valley Water that we talked about a little bit, Aaron, was that you've done something kind of interesting there in terms of pulling together some different funding sources, including going to the whole community. So I'd love you to talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Let's start out with Measure S and a little bit on the flood risk reduction and environmental enhancement side of things. So yes, the great residents of Santa Clara County just recently approved Measure S. The great thing about Measure S is that not only does it have programs in there to improve, to get clean water and environmental and flood risk reduction for all, it also has operations and maintenance in perpetuity. So it is something that instead of having to go back every 10 years or all these other things, Measure S, it could be repealed, but of course doesn't necessarily have a sunset date. So that was one of the great things that we've just had move on, is that it allows us to get a much better, clearer picture of what the horizon looks like, or how things will move as we move forward with that, instead of having a set program that of course expires after a certain amount of time. One of the other things that I'd like to talk about, though, back on the water rates, of course, is that we're being a wholesaler, it's a little bit different, but we do have quite a few programs to try to ensure affordability. And one of the key things I think that we have are trying to tackle with is making sure that we our water supply and master plan and annual updates are right-sized for these needed investments, right? I mean, I think that the idea of making sure that we are diligent with the money that we have, and that we make sure that the programs are all what we're looking at is adequate and right-sized through the horizon of what we need, and through that, as we mentioned before, definitely pursuing state and federal grants and loans for infrastructure needs is really key to us. The other thing that we're looking at is that our expedited purified water project is actually looking to be a public-private partnership, probably to try to leverage private funding, when we can. And then not only that, but because we do have some ad valorem property taxes and some other things, we have a water rate assistance program through a nonprofit that we're able to use to, with those ad valorums not being subject to, some of our Prop 26 or other restrictions we have on making sure that rate funded programs there. So we are definitely looking at all those things, making sure that as we mentioned, that we have the right investments in our water supply program, we have the right things moving forward, that we're pursuing those federal grants and loans, and that we're looking at other things such as public-private partnerships or other partnerships that we can to help that work, and then of course trying to work with our nonprofits and NGOs to understand and help the county's disadvantaged communities where we can.
Thank you. And so I'd love to have a couple moments to go back to Alesandra and to Rachel about kind of the thinking about the new or potentially new affordability programs which we now have, as Alesandra, as you mentioned, in the new federal legislation, and Rachel, we'll get to you also with just a little bit about what's under consideration at the state level. So tell us a little bit more about, I'll get the acronym right, I think, LIWAP, right? Alesandra.
Sure. So the LIWAP program was really created in response to the COVID pandemic to address some of the arrearages that were caused by people being out of work for so long. And so there's also an important policy that'll be moving forward, hopefully with the passage of the Build Back Better program that was also authorized in the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which is $225 million for the creation of a low-income rate assistance program, which is a little bit longer term at EPA. Now, I know that's a tiny amount of money, but this program kind of is a seed program. It's a pilot program for 40 cities. That would be testing out the creation of a low-income rate assistance program at the federal level. So I think this is a really important avenue for exploration, as the LIWAP program was administered by HHS, since it was kind of modeled on the energy program that I mentioned earlier, whereas this could kind of build into and assist the programs that are being moved forward at EPA for disadvantaged communities. And then I also just wanted to highlight that some of the groups that Water Foundation supports have also been working at the state level on the creation of a low-income water rate assistance fund. And I know Rachel probably want to dig into this a little bit as well, but I just wanted to flag that, we've seen rates in California rise dramatically. The impacts of that fall primarily on disadvantaged communities, and it's really important for all of us to come together, since we're acknowledging affordability as such a big problem, to find a solution for water bill assistance.
Great. Rachel, that was a great segue to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a priority for the legislature. Lots of work in this area, directing the state water board to do a report and look at options, which has come out, and several bills on this topic. I think the challenge is just what is the funding source and what is the role of the state as compared to locals. We're in a great fiscal situation right now, but we don't know how long that will last. And so there's always a tension of setting up ongoing spending commitments from the state, and what is the appropriate funding source for that, and can we sustain it? Those of us who lived through the last recession and had to make all of the cuts with the state budget that we did know how difficult that was for everybody. And so if we're working on setting up a new program, can we find a kind of an ongoing funding source that we can count on? So I think those are some of the discussions around this program. Everybody acknowledges that it's a priority and it's a need, but thinking about how to structure who pays for it and what source pays for it, so that if it's created, it can be sustainable.
Thanks. And Rosemary, we're going to go to Q&A in a minute, but I just wanted to circle back to you, because I know you mentioned you've got a very high share of renters in your community, and that kind of adds an interesting dimension to this discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges of some of the low-income water rate assistance programs is that they're modeled on, the ones where energy is given you, everybody has an energy account, right? And in water, oftentimes a big multifamily complex is master metered. And so people are paying their water and their wastewater charges really, and refuse to the extent that that's a combined bill, as it is in Santa Cruz, through their rent. And so we don't have a relationship with someone who's a renter, so that it's hard for us to give that person a bill credit. So that's one of the challenges, I think, in looking at low-income water rate assistance programs, that the Water Research Foundation has done work on this, for example, trying to figure out how to make that adjustment. And I think that's going to be a challenge going forward. And in Santa Cruz, about 60% of our residential units are rentals as opposed to owner occupied.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've given our audience a great primer on these issues, and now they want to grill you. Just a reminder that anybody else who still wants to send in a question, please do so. This is the email to send it to, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com, and say who you are when you pop the email in. Okay, we're going to start with this one from Nick Cahill, who is a reporter for Courthouse News. So Nick asks, considering the planned infusions coming from the budget and from the state budget and from the federal government, should state agencies be actively coordinating and helping local agencies apply for funds? And can the state play a bigger role in streamlining the process, cutting through red tape, and getting the money out quickly while drought is still fresh on the minds of Californians? Who would like to go first on that? Don't be shy.
I'm for streamlining.
Any concrete ways that you'd like to see that happen, Rosemary?
I do think that this always happens. At least I've seen it in several cycles when there's been some kind of a event or an economic downturn. The readiness, the sort of shovel-ready kind of strategy is really important. And so for entities that are ready to, bring their things forward, that they have their environmental work done, they've got a concrete plan, they've got a good cost estimate. I think that's the kind of stuff inevitably that makes it easier for us to apply and for state agencies to make decisions. But unfortunately, getting ready costs money. So I think there needs to be some investment in that part of the cycle of project development, particularly for places in the state that are really struggling.
And Rachel, I saw you were going to weigh in.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's a concern, just capacity at the local level, but also of state agencies when there's so much money coming out at once. And if we're going to face another budget surplus in the coming year, even more money, to make sure that the funds are used effectively, that the projects are selected appropriately, that there's oversight over how the funds are spent, that we are being thoughtful about how we get the funding out the door, and that perhaps shovel-ready projects are great, but we also want to make sure that some of the communities that may need the funding the most get the funding, and they may not, as Rosemary mentioned, they may not be ready yet. And so how can we, as a state and as state government, help support them to develop grant applications, to set up the projects effectively, rather than just a full, sometimes there's an emphasis on get the money out the door, get the money out the door, get the money out the door. And I think certainly we don't want it sitting around, but we also want to be sure that we're using the dollars effectively where the needs are the greatest. So I do think that that's something that state government's going to really have to focus on in the coming year and coming years, with the amount of state money we're talking about, but also federal money at the same time.
Maybe I'll use that.
Yeah, Alesandra.
Yeah,
please.
I know this is a challenge that Assistant Administrator Fox is thinking about from the EPA's perspective in terms of how can we help communities access funding. Requirements like shovel ready can be far too onerous for small struggling communities to be able to meet those requirements. And so I know some of the pieces that they're thinking about, as I mentioned before, is technical assistance that can be provided to communities to ensure that they're ready to be able to apply. I know that the bipartisan infrastructure deal even includes administrative set-asides for funding for EPA to be able to set up contracts and help DACs apply for funding, which I think is a really important step. But ultimately, I think the onus will be on the state to help partner and work with these communities to access this funding.
And hopefully, I'm just thinking that all of the sort of work that's been done in California over the last few years to build capacity, for example, within the State Water Board on support for communities that already were chronically underserved with respect to safe drinking water, may put us in a better position at the starting gate for this.
I absolutely think we're in a good position. I know that earlier it was mentioned that the state's already conducted a full needs assessment of the state, which I think puts us in a good place to know where the challenges are, what funding is needed where. And there's been some really important authorities passed allowing the State Water Board to consolidate even at-risk water systems and improving the ability to consolidate, which hopefully will improve the ratepayer base for systems that are just too small to continue to provide safe water.
Erin, did you want to wait? Oh, go ahead, Rosemary.
Oh, I just wanted to mention one other thing that I think is a barrier, that is something that we should really be talking about. And that is that most of these state funds come in the form of something reimbursable. You have to spend the money to do the project, and then you get reimbursed. And there's a lag time between what you have to submit and when you get the money, that supposedly is 45 days, but more realistically is 100 and some days in our experience. For an entity that isn't huge, you have to have the money to pay your bills while waiting for reimbursement. It led us to get a $50 million line of credit to deal with cash flow issues associated with the kind of spending that we're doing for $150 million worth of capital spending that's underway right now. So that's not an inconsequential.
That's right. And that's not available. That's not available to everybody either.
Yeah.
So there's a question I wanted to pivot over to start with Erin on, which is on the sort of on the cost side of things, because you mentioned, keeping things affordable is not just about finding the money, but it's also about making the right spending decisions so that you can, the most cost effective things to keep costs down. And this question from Michael Dupre is kind of in that vein about on the issue of recycled water and even gray water, and sort of making sure that he wants to know what has been done to ensure that processed and treated water can be returned to the water supply. But that's more on the kind of the regulatory side, on the institutional side, to enable these sources to be to be used for a wide range of purposes. And might be a challenge you're confronting right now with your recycled water plans.
Right. No, and I think that an excellent question, and I think that making sure that we use the right water for the right use, right? We have a extensive non-potable reuse system that we're partnering with, that's for the Purple Pipe system. And then not only that, but we're actually working, we have an expedited purified water project where we're going a step further, where we're going to take the water and put it into some recharge basins that we have and put it back into the groundwater, which then the retailers will then pump back up. And of course, we also have our eye, that's indirect potable reuse. We have our eye on direct potable reuse into the future, right? So right now, the indirect potable reuse is putting it into the groundwater aquifer, so it can be used later. But sometime in the future, there may be a time when we put it to the Valley Water has 3 drinking water treatment plants. It may augment some of those sources that ends up to our drinking water treatment plants. Not only that, but we definitely are looking at all sorts of things on the drought has got us refocused on these, is understanding certain other things such as like floodmar or stormwater capture, or all these other things, that now that water, there's only a certain amount of water on the earth, and of course here in Santa Clara County, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to make sure that we can, of course, you have to have the right size and the right program and the right funding to kind of make those things work. But as of right now, we're looking at every drop of water that's out there and wondering what is the best way that we can make sure that it's being used. Not only that, being used, or also remains in the creeks for the environment or in other areas to make sure that we're maybe offsetting a use that we had before to help the environment and going with a different source to try to meet some of the water supply needs elsewhere. So definitely, and now is the time for us to really think outside the box. There's recycled purified, there's like you mentioned, gray water, there's all these other things out there, even floodmar, which would be this maybe taking open lands and doing a little bit of recharge. Of course, we're still on the very cusp of trying to figure out where those things are, but now is little things that we weren't really thinking about so much before, because they were smaller in size or had a different value. We're definitely now looking at a little bit closer, making sure we can understand, has technology changed? Can we kind of get into those realms again? And is there grants or other fundings that can help us push these technologies and these better ways to use water forward.
Thank you. So now we've got a question from a friend from agriculture. This panel has not been focused so much on ag, but this is but I know as water managers and water policy folks, you think about this a lot too. This is John from Dunnigan Farms, who asks, kind of looking at the budget surplus for this year, another one projected next year. What are the obstacles to applying a fraction of this to accelerating all of the above approaches to addressing California's water problems? So that kind of tees off, in a way, for urban areas, the kind of things that Aaron was talking about. But I think, yesterday's panel also discussed kind of big picture, the overall state water system. What are the important things we need to do for building resilience in terms of adapting to more volatile, warmer climate? And where do you see sort of funding that's already going to be available with the new state and federal dollars, but also potential new funding that might be available this coming year going toward these kinds of things? Maybe Rachel, start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great use of budget surplus. And as I mentioned, thinking about where can the state leverage its dollars the furthest, multi-benefit projects, testing out new strategies, trying new things, seeing what works. That's a perfect role for state funding. So things like flood managed aquifer recharge, land repurposing, implementation of Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, those are all kind of multi-benefit, multi-beneficiary, win-win-win type efforts. So I think that will, I expect, be a big focus of discussions for the legislature for how to use this funding.
And another thing that came up in the discussion yesterday, and this was in talking with, I think it was especially Allie Forsyth, who's involved in one of the proposed new surface reservoir projects now, Sykes Reservoir, talked about kind of the importance of partnerships and cooperation. And I think, again, speaking to John's question, that we're seeing a lot more discussions, not only about cooperation at the very local level among urban water agencies, but also urban ag partnerships, broader regional partnerships. So I'm wondering if, particularly Rosemary and Aaron, if you have a couple quick words on that before we kind of head to our wrap up.
I can talk a little bit about our situation, because of course Santa Cruz is it's isolated. We don't have any state water from any place else. We only have water that falls on the ground in this county. And so in the northern part, there are like 4 or 5 water utilities, and we work extensively together, both on the groundwater management planning work that's been going on, but also on utility planning and looking at how we can leverage the resources we have, whether it's freshwater, wastewater, groundwater resources. There's been quite a bit of work done. And again, the big issue for us is we have a number of smaller utilities. Obviously, Santa Cruz is a big dog, but that don't have the rate base to spread these, the investment around, because most of these big projects, whether it's an indirect potable reuse or some kind of, interties, they're expensive. The price tags of some of these projects are kind of eye-wateringly expensive for a water system that might need it for groundwater sustainability, but has 11,000 customers.
Aaron, I know you're part of a consortium with a bunch of agricultural districts in your adjacent neighborhood. So just a quick word about the partnerships and potential there.
Right, and I think exactly as all have alluded to before, the way to get things, or with the limited amount of water that we have, it's partnerships, right? I mean, we need to understand, and for us, even or for Valley Water, even closer, it's water for flood risk reduction, water for environment, and water for water supply. So for drinking, so it's really partnerships inside our organization per se, but partnerships with all of the other things that are happening outside the organizations, all of the cities, even locally, all of the NGOs, all of the regulatory permitting agencies. If we're doing these if larger projects with storage or recycled water or all these other things, the way new projects are being moved forward is working together. Not only is that we have to work together because we need to make sure that we're getting everybody's needs addressed and understand what the impacts are of all these projects that we have out there. But not only that, but we also have to work together to find the money for these projects, right? Now the idea that these larger projects are big, massive projects that need partnerships for funding, need partnerships for understanding, and making sure we can understand all the impacts and make sure we're putting the right thing into the right place. So partnerships are key. And not only that, but of course, in us for being a state and a federal contractor, making sure that we understand partnerships with the Delta and with the others that we partner with on the imported water side. So
great. All right, now we're getting to our lightning round because we're about to wrap up. And just this is a way of kind of segueing into tomorrow's final panel, a discussion of our 3-panel conference. The theme of that conference is Embracing Transformative Change. That's going to be moderated by Celeste Cantu, who is chair of our advisory council and also chair of the San Diego Regional Water Quality Control Board. And she's bringing together a group of change makers from around the state to talk about that. And I thought I'd give you all an opportunity just to, in 30 seconds, to spur them with the transformative change that you would most like to see in thinking about the challenges that we've been talking about here. And maybe Rosemary, I'll start with you.
Easy for me. Prop 218 reform and some kind of ongoing low-income water rate assistance program, state or federal.
That was 2, but those are good. They kind of go together.
They go together.
Okay, Aaron, 30 seconds.
Maybe I'll steal one of Rosemary's. I think the understanding a state or federal led for low income and disadvantaged communities. But I think the last part is just like what you were talking about before for transformative changes is actually more than just talking, is actually sitting down together and working on projects together. I think the idea of is it ag or urban? No, it's water. Is it north or south? It's water. But we all need to work together in California and in the rest of the environment to understand, what it would take to make sure that we are using the water efficiently and wisely in California. And even if you don't have a whole lot of interact with others, I still think that understanding and getting the news across and making sure that we have the right amount of funding in the right places and together, with one voice, we're a little bit small, but if we work with everybody else, we can be quite mighty in making sure that we have a reliable and sustainable supply of water for all.
Thank you, Aaron. Rachel.
Aggressively embracing the new normal. So not trying to work towards holding on to status quo, given the new conditions are going to preclude that. So using it as an opportunity and really moving forward with the climate change lens in every decision we make.
And Alesandra, last word to you.
Absolutely. Well, I will say that Rosemary took one of the ones I was going to use, so I will just add in the spirit of Rachel's comment, ensuring that disadvantaged communities in the Central Valley are protected from declining groundwater levels for their drinking water.
Thank you all. So we've reached the end of our program today. I want to thank Jeff for the great introduction. I want to thank our panelists for joining us. I want to thank all of you in the audience. I want to thank our sponsors. And those of you who pre-registered, later today, you'll receive a survey, and we would appreciate if you could take a couple minutes to respond and let us know how we did. That always helps us to improve. And we hope that you'll join us tomorrow for the final session of our conference at 11. And again, all of these will be also are being recorded, and it'll be available on our website later too, if you can't make it at 11 tomorrow. So thanks again. Please be safe and have a great afternoon.